He aged out of the system with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes. What a dying stranger left him wasn't just a house. It was a chance to uncover the truth about the mother he thought had abandoned him. If you're watching this, maybe you know what it's like to stand on a threshold, with one world ending and no idea what the next one holds. If you do, stick around. This story is for you. Hit that subscribe button because we're building a community here for people who've had to fight for their own beginnings. My 18th birthday started the same way every other day had for the last 6 years, with the low hum of the industrial HVAC system at the Northwood Group Home for Boys. It was a sound I had come to associate with a specific kind of waiting for breakfast, waiting for school, waiting for your weekly case review, waiting for your life to finally start. For me, that day had arrived. Freedom, they called it. It felt more like being pushed off a cliff in the dark. Mrs. Gable, the house supervisor, with a perpetually tired smile, handed me a large black garbage bag. "Everything's packed, Leo. You sure you got it all?" I looked inside. A few pairs of worn jeans, a handful of t-shirts with faded logos, a single hoodie I'd had since I was 15, and a worn paperback copy of a book I'd read a dozen times. "Yeah," I said, my voice rough. "That's all of it. All 17 years, 11 months, and 29 days of my life, stuffed into plastic." She sighed, a soft, weary sound that was as familiar as the humming vents. "You have the packet, the resources, the numbers for transitional housing?" I patted the manila envelope tucked into the back of my jeans. It felt thin and useless, a paper shield against a world I knew nothing about. The state's parting gift, a list of homeless shelters and job centers, a map to nowhere. For 2 years, I'd attended mandatory independent living classes. They taught us how to write a check, how to interview for a job at a fast food restaurant, how to budget the money we didn't have. They taught us the mechanics of survival, but not the feeling of it. They never taught you how to handle the silence when you're suddenly, terrifyingly alone. "I have it," I confirmed. "Good. Well..." She hesitated, her hands fluttering in the air before settling on her hips. "The bus to downtown leaves at 10. You've got your final stipend check?" I nodded, feeling the crisp paper folded in my pocket. $400. It was meant to be a security deposit, a first month's rent on a life I couldn't imagine. To me, it felt like the last handful of dirt being thrown on a coffin. We stood in the linoleum-floored entryway, the place where I'd first arrived as a scared 12-year-old, clutching a smaller bag and a larger file of paperwork that detailed all the ways my life had gone wrong. The smell was the same: bleach, boiled vegetables, and a faint, underlying scent of boyish sweat. I suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to be gone, to be anywhere but there. The place wasn't a home, it was a holding cell, and my sentence was up. "Okay then, Leo." Mrs. Gable's voice was softer now. "Good luck." She didn't hug me. They weren't allowed to. It was a rule, something about professional boundaries, but she put a hand on my shoulder, a brief, warm pressure that was gone as quickly as it came. "You're a good kid. You'll be all right." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe in the neat, hopeful narrative she was offering me. But the foster system doesn't raise you on hope. It raises you on pragmatism. It teaches you that good kids end up in bad situations all the time. It teaches you that being all right is a luxury, not a guarantee. I walked out the heavy metal door without looking back. The lock clicked behind me, a sound of finality that echoed in the cold October air. The sky was a flat, unforgiving gray, the color of concrete and forgotten promises. I slung the garbage bag over my shoulder and started walking toward the bus stop, each step taking me further from the only stability I had known and closer to an abyss of uncertainty. The $400 in my pocket felt less like a key and more like an anchor pulling me down. I had no family, no friends outside the system who I could call, no safety net. I had the state-mandated packet of resources and a deep, hollowing ache in my chest that I'd carried for as long as I could remember, the ache of being left behind. The story I'd been told was simple. My mother, a woman I barely remembered, had given me up. They said she couldn't handle it, that she had problems. It was a vague, sterile explanation that left a wound in me, a question I was too afraid to ask. Why wasn't I worth keeping? Standing at that bus stop, with the wind whipping at my thin jacket, I had never felt more disposable. The bus hissed to a stop in front of me, its doors folding open like a mechanical mouth, and I stepped on, ready to be swallowed. I didn't know then that this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a journey back to a truth that had been buried for 18 years, a truth that started with a phone call I would receive in less than an hour. The bus ride was a blur of strip malls and gray suburban sprawl. I stared out the window, but my mind was a whirlwind of logistics. Find a room to rent, something cheap, something that would take cash. Find a job, any job. Don't run out of money. The mantra repeated itself, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of my fear. My phone, a cheap prepaid model with a cracked screen, buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it. It was probably a wrong number. No one ever called me. But it buzzed again, insistent. I pulled it out. An unknown number with an out-of-state area code. Curiosity, or maybe just boredom, made me answer. Hello? Am I speaking with Leo Vance? The voice on the other end was female, professional, and calm. It was the kind of voice that automatically made you sit up straighter. It's just Leo, I said, a reflex from years of correcting caseworkers. My legal name was Leo, but the Vance part was a ghost. It was on my birth certificate, but it was a name I had no connection to. In the system, I was just Leo. My apologies, Leo. My name is Evelyn Reed. I'm an attorney from Crestwood County. I'm calling you regarding the estate of my client, Mr. Arthur Vance. The name hit me like a stone skipping across water, dredging up a murky, half-forgotten memory. Vance, Arthur Vance, an old man, a dusty porch, the smell of pipe tobacco and damp earth, a vague feeling of safety from a time before everything fell apart. I couldn't have been more than 4 or 5. Arthur Vance, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. I think I knew him a long time ago. He's my grandfather, I think. He was your great-uncle, actually, Ms. Reed corrected gently. I'm very sorry to have to inform you of this over the phone, but Arthur passed away 3 days ago. He was 92. I didn't know what to say. Grief felt like the wrong response. I hadn't seen this man in over a decade. I couldn't even clearly picture his face, but a strange sense of loss settled over me anyway. The loss of a connection I never even knew I had. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. He had been ill for some time, she continued, her tone empathetic but efficient. Leo, the reason I'm calling is that Arthur named you as the sole beneficiary of his will. He has left you his property, a house and 5 acres of land just outside the town of North Fork. The bus lurched to a stop, and the sound of the brakes squealing seemed to pull the world back into focus. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. A house. Me? There has to be a mistake. He barely knew me. There is no mistake, she said, her voice firm. He was very clear in his instructions. He spent years making sure everything was in order. For you when you turned 18. The property is yours, free and clear. There is no mortgage. The property taxes are paid up for the next year. My mind couldn't process it. A house, land. It sounded like something from a movie, not something that happened to a kid aging out of foster care with $400 in a garbage bag. It felt like a trap. People like me didn't get windfalls. We got eviction notices and pink slips. Why? I asked, the word coming out choked. Why would he do that? There was a pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her professional tone had softened. Arthur was a very private man, Leo, but he was also a man of his word. He told me he had made a promise a long time ago. He said you would understand when you got there. He left something for you at the house. A promise. The words echoed in the empty space of my memory. I tried to grasp the wisp of a thought, the image of that dusty porch, but it dissolved. How do I get there? I asked, my own voice sounding distant and strange to my ears. I can wire you money for a bus ticket. North Fork is about a 5-hour ride from where you are now. There's a bus that leaves this afternoon. I've already taken the liberty of checking the schedule, she said. When you arrive, there's a lockbox on the front porch. The code is your birthday, the day, month, and year. My birthday. A date that had always felt like a countdown to abandonment now felt like a key. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Leo, she said, her voice pulling me back. I know this is a lot to take in, but Arthur was adamant. He wanted you to have a place to land, a home. Home. The word hung in the air, foreign and beautiful and terrifying. I had never had one, not a real one. The apartments I'd lived in with my mother before she was gone were a haze of shouting and slammed doors. The foster homes were a rotating series of strangers' houses where I was a temporary guest. The group home was an institution, but a home that was mine. The idea was so immense, it was paralyzing. I'll take the bus, I heard myself say. I got off at the next stop, my original plan to find a cheap room forgotten. I stood on a busy street corner, the city noise fading into a dull roar. A house, a place to land. It could be a lie, it could be a cruel joke, but it was also the only sliver of hope I had. I walked to the bus station, my garbage bag feeling a little lighter on my shoulder. The journey ahead was no longer a descent into an abyss, but a path toward a question mark. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't just running from a past I couldn't escape. I was moving toward a future I couldn't predict. And in that moment, the fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was joined by something else, something fragile and new. A flicker of possibility. The 5-hour bus ride was a journey through landscapes that grew progressively wilder and more remote. The concrete and steel of the city gave way to rolling hills, then dense forests of pine and oak. The towns we passed through became smaller, the buildings older, the pace of life visibly slower. With every mile, I felt like I was traveling not just across the state, but back in time. I watched the world go by, my mind a blank slate. I had tried again to summon a clear memory of Arthur Vance, but all I could retrieve were fragments. The scent of sawdust, the low rumble of a quiet voice, the feeling of a large calloused hand resting on my head. It was the memory of a ghost. By the time the bus pulled into North Fork, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in strokes of orange and deep purple. The town was little more than a main street with a single traffic light, a general store, a diner, and a gas station. It was quiet, the kind of deep country quiet that hums with the sound of crickets and distant birds. I was the only one who got off. The bus driver gave me a curious look as he handed me my garbage bag. "This is it, son. End of the line." He wasn't wrong. I stood there as the bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing around a bend, leaving me in the growing twilight. The air was crisp and smelled of pine needles and damp earth, a clean, sharp scent that was a world away from the city's exhaust fumes. Ms. Reed's instructions had been simple. The property was 3 miles out of town on an old logging road. There was no local taxi service. I had to walk. The walk was surreal. The road was paved for the first mile, then turned to gravel. The sky above was a canopy of stars, more than I had ever seen in my life. unobscured by the city's perpetual glow. The only sounds were the crunch of my footsteps on the gravel and the rustle of unseen creatures in the woods that lined the road. Part of me was terrified. I was a city kid, born and raised. The darkness of the countryside felt absolute, primal. But another part of me felt a strange sense of peace. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A rusted mailbox half hidden by overgrown bushes with the name Vance barely visible in faded hand-painted letters. Next to it, a narrow dirt driveway disappeared into the trees. My heart started pounding, a heavy rhythmic thud in my chest. This was it. I walked up the driveway, the garbage bag rustling against my leg. The trees opened up into a clearing, and there it was. The house. It was a simple two-story farmhouse, its white paint peeling and grayed by the weather. A wide, covered porch ran the length of the front, one of its support pillars sagging slightly. The windows were dark, like vacant eyes. It looked weathered, neglected, and tired, but it was standing, solid, real. To the side, a large barn stood silhouetted against the starry sky, its roofline stark and angular. I approached the porch slowly, my footsteps echoing on the old wooden planks. And there, just as Ms. Reed had said, was a small black lockbox attached to the doorframe. My hands were trembling as I reached out and spun the small dials. My birthday, 10/24. The final digits clicked into place, and with a soft snick, the box popped open. Inside, nestled on a bed of worn velvet, was a single old-fashioned brass key. It felt impossibly heavy in my hand. It was more than a key. It was a testament. Arthur had known my birthday. He had set this up for me. This small, solid piece of metal was proof that someone, somewhere, had been thinking of me. Not as a case file, not as a problem to be managed, but as a person worth remembering. I stood there for a long moment, just holding the key, the cold metal warming in my palm. A wave of emotion, too complex to name, washed over me. It was a mix of disbelief, fear, and a profound, aching sense of gratitude. For the first time, the word home didn't feel like an abstract concept. It felt like the weight of this key in my hand. Taking a deep breath, I slid the key into the lock. It was stiff, protesting after what was probably years of disuse. I had to jiggle it, put my shoulder into the door, and then, with a loud groan of protest from the old wood, the lock turned. The door swung inward, opening into perfect, silent darkness. The air that wafted out was cool and musty, the scent of a place that had been closed up for a long time, the smell of dust, old wood, and forgotten memories. I hesitated on the threshold, one foot in the life I'd always known, the other stepping into a complete unknown. Then, clutching my garbage bag, I stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind me, the sound echoing through the empty house like a final, definitive punctuation mark. I was here. I was home. The darkness inside the house was absolute. I fumbled along the wall, my fingers brushing against textured, peeling wallpaper, until they found a light switch. I flicked it. Nothing happened. The power was off. Of course. For a moment, a familiar sense of hopelessness washed over me. Here I was, in a strange, dark house in the middle of nowhere, with no power and no idea what to do next. It felt like just another one of the universe's cruel jokes. But then I remembered the small flashlight on my keychain, a flimsy thing I'd won at a school fair years ago. Its beam was weak, cutting a pale, shaky circle in the oppressive blackness, but it was enough. I swept the light around the room. I was in a small entryway. To my right, a staircase led up into more darkness. Straight ahead was a living room filled with shapes draped in white sheets, like a room full of ghosts. The air was thick with the smell of disuse. Dust motes danced in the weak beam of my light. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the creak of the floorboards under my feet. It should have been terrifying, but instead it felt peaceful, reverent almost, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. I moved into the living room, my flashlight beam gliding over the shrouded furniture. A sofa, a couple of armchairs, a coffee table. It was a stage set for a life that had ended. On the mantelpiece above a large stone fireplace, the light caught something. A single thick envelope propped up against an old clock. My name was written on the front in a shaky but elegant script. Leo. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was what Ms. Reed had said Arthur had left for me. I picked it up. The paper was thick and creamy, the kind of expensive stationery I'd never touched before. I tore it open, my hands clumsy with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written in the same spidery handwriting. I sat down on the edge of a sheet-covered armchair and began to read, the small circle of my flashlight illuminating the words. "My dear Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then it means I am gone and you have come home. I imagine you have many questions. Who was this old man who left you a house? Why did he do it? I will try to answer what I can, though some stories are not mine to tell completely. You will have to discover them for yourself, here in this house. I know your memories of me are likely faint if they exist at all. You were very young, but I remember you. I remember a bright little boy with your mother's eyes who used to chase butterflies in the yard of this very house. This place was her sanctuary, and by extension, it was yours." My mother's eyes. The words made my own eyes burn. No one had ever said that to me before. The official story was that she was unfit, that she had abandoned me. But Arthur's words painted a different picture, a sanctuary. "Your mother, Sarah," the letter continued, "was a very special person. She was brave and kind, but she had a shadow following her, a shadow that she was trying to escape. She came here to North Fork looking for a safe place, and I was fortunate enough to be able to offer her this one. For a little while, she was happy here. She found peace. She planted the garden out back. She painted the walls in the kitchen. She filled this quiet old house with laughter. Your laughter." I had to stop reading for a moment, my throat tight. I had no memory of this, no memory of a garden or a freshly painted kitchen or laughter. My memories of my mother were fragmented and dark, colored by the trauma of our separation and the sterile narrative of the foster care system. This letter was offering me a different past, a past where I was loved, where I was wanted. I made a promise to her, Leo. I promised her that no matter what happened, I would make sure you were safe. And I promised her that one day this house would be yours, a place to stand, a foundation. Life has not been easy for you, I know that. I couldn't intervene directly for reasons that are complicated and painful. To do so would have been to put you in danger. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, to stand by and watch you grow up from a distance, knowing I could not reach out. But I never forgot my promise. I have kept this place for you. It is your birthright. This house is more than wood and stone. It is a story, your story, and it is full of secrets. I have left things for you to find, clues, pieces of your mother's life, things she wanted you to have. Look for them. The truth is here if you are brave enough to find it. Start with the place where the sun first touches the house in the morning. Your mother always loved the morning light. Welcome home, son. May you find peace here. Yours, Arthur Vance. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through the tears I didn't realize I was shedding. I cried for the mother I never knew, for the childhood I'd lost, and for this old man, this stranger, who had held a vigil for me my entire life. He hadn't just left me a house. He had left me a history, a purpose. The fear and uncertainty that had dogged me for years began to recede, replaced by a new, fierce determination. The house wasn't empty. It was full of answers, and I was going to find them. The sun first touches the house in the morning. That meant the east side. My weak flashlight beam was already dying, but I knew what I would do as soon as the sun came up. My treasure hunt had begun. The first night in the house was cold and strange. I didn't dare venture upstairs into the unknown darkness. Instead, I pulled the sheet off the sofa, revealing worn but comfortable floral upholstery. I used the dusty sheet as a blanket and my garbage bag of clothes as a pillow. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of the wind outside, sent a jolt through me. But underneath the fear was a current of excitement. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was on a quest. I woke with the first gray light of dawn filtering through the grimy windows. The living room was cast in a soft, ethereal glow, the dust motes still dancing in the air. I remembered Arthur's clue, the place where the sun first touches the house, the east side. I got up, my body stiff from the cold and the awkward sleeping position, and went to the front of the house. The windows there faced east, looking out over the overgrown front yard. The morning sun, a brilliant orange orb, was just cresting the distant treetops. Its rays streamed through a large window in what looked like a dining room, illuminating a specific spot on the far wall. A single beam of light fell directly onto a framed picture. I walked over to it. The picture was a simple, faded watercolor of a field of wildflowers. It was pretty, but unremarkable. I ran my fingers over the frame, the dusty glass. Nothing. I took it off the wall. It was heavier than it looked. I turned it over. The back was sealed with brown paper, but in one corner I saw it. A slight bulge. My heart quickened. I used my thumbnail to carefully tear the paper. Tucked between the backing and the watercolor itself was another envelope, smaller this time, yellowed with age. It was addressed simply to my Leo. The handwriting was different from Arthur's. It was feminine, looping, and graceful. It was my mother's. My hands shook so badly I could barely open it. This was a voice from the dead, a message from the woman who had been a ghost in my life for so long. The letter inside was short, just a single page. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, it means you are grown and you have found your way back home. Oh, my sweet boy, I hope life has been kind to you. I hope you have been loved. There is so much I want to tell you, so much I need to explain, but it is not safe, not even in these pages. The man who hurt us, he has long arms. I cannot risk him ever finding you." The man who hurt us. The words landed like a punch to the gut. The vague story from the social workers had been about her problems, her instability, but this letter spoke of a him, a threat. "Know this, my love," she continued. "Leaving you was not a choice. It was the only way I could protect you. It broke my heart into a million pieces, a pain I will carry with me forever. But your safety was all that mattered. I made Arthur promise. He is a good man, the only good man I have ever known. He will keep his word. He will keep you safe. I don't have much to give you, but I saved what I could. It's not a fortune, but I hope it can give you a start, a chance at the life I couldn't give you. Arthur knows where it is. He will guide you. Find it, Leo. Use it to build something good, something safe. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Never, ever doubt that. Forever, Mom." I sank to the floor, the letter clutched in my hand. The quiet, dusty house seemed to press in on me. All these years I had carried the weight of my own narrative. The unwanted child, the boy whose mother didn't love him enough to stay. And in a few short paragraphs, she had shattered it. It wasn't abandonment, it was protection. The pain of that revelation was immense, a sharp, cleansing agony. I cried, not silent tears this time, but deep, ragged sobs. I cried for her fear, for her sacrifice, and for the lost years between us. After a long time, I wiped my eyes and stood up, a new resolve hardening inside me. My mother had left me a mission, and Arthur had left me a map. I had to find what she had saved for me, but first, I needed to get this house in order. I needed power, water, supplies. I was 3 miles from town with no car and only a few $100s to my name. The challenge felt enormous, but for the first time, it didn't feel impossible. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a legacy. I spent the next 2 days walking, back and forth from the town of North Fork, my garbage bag now repurposed to carry groceries instead of my life's possessions. The people in the small town were curious but kind. The woman at the general store, a grandmotherly type named Martha, gave me a friendly smile. "You're the one staying out at the old Vance place, aren't you? Haven't seen anyone out there in years. Good to see some life in it." I managed to get the power company to send a technician out. The man, a gruff but efficient guy named Dale, flipped a few breakers in the rusty box on the side of the house, and just like that, there was light. When the bare bulb in the kitchen flickered on, illuminating the small, cheerful room painted a sunny yellow, I felt a ridiculous surge of triumph. My mother painted this room, I thought. I was standing in a room my mother had filled with hope. The water was next. It ran brown. From the taps at first, sputtering and coughing, but eventually it cleared. Small victories, but they felt monumental. I was slowly, painstakingly bringing the house back to life. In the evenings, I explored. I uncovered the furniture, dusting off pieces that were old but well made. I opened closets and cupboards, finding them mostly empty, cleaned out by Arthur in preparation for my arrival. It was a blank slate waiting for me. On the third day, a sleek black SUV I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. A man in a crisp, expensive suit got out. He looked completely out of place against the backdrop of the rustic, neglected farmhouse. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes and a leather briefcase in his hand. "Leo?" he asked, striding toward me as I stood on the porch. "My name is Mark Trask. I'm a representative for Pioneer Holdings." He handed me a business card. The company name was embossed in gold foil. It felt heavy, important. "We're a development group," he explained, his eyes scanning the property, lingering on the barn and the wide open fields behind it. "We've been acquiring land in this area for a new residential project, high-end country estates, beautiful community. We were very sorry to hear about Mr. Vance's passing. We had approached him several times over the years, but he was resistant to selling." I had a feeling resistant was a polite understatement. "Now that the property has passed to you," he continued, his smile widening slightly, "we'd like to renew our offer. We're prepared to offer you $750,000 for the house and the 5 acres. The number hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back a step, my mind reeling. $750,000. It was an astronomical sum, more money than I had ever dreamed of. It was enough to go anywhere, do anything. A new life handed to me on a silver platter. All my problems, the lack of money, the isolation, the uncertainty, could be wiped away with a single signature. I could leave this dusty old house and its painful memories behind. I could be free. "That's a lot of money," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. "It's a very generous offer," Trask said smoothly. "It's our final one for this parcel. You'd be set for life, son. No more worries. We'd handle all the paperwork, all the closing costs. All you'd have to do is sign and walk away with a check." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "This is the official purchase agreement. Take your time, look it over, but the offer is only good for 48 hours. We have a schedule to keep." He placed the folder on the porch railing, a silent, heavy ultimatum. Then he gave me another one of his practiced smiles, got back in his SUV, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. I stood there for a long time, staring at the folder. $750,000. It was the easy way out, the smart choice by any logical measure. But then I thought of Arthur's letter. This place is your birthright. I thought of my mother's words. Use it to build something good, something safe. Selling this house felt like selling their memory, their sacrifice. It felt like selling the only real home I had ever had. The money was a ticket to a new life, but keeping the house was a chance to reclaim an old one. The weight of the choice settled on me, heavier than any amount of money. I had 48 hours to decide who I was going to be. The purchase agreement sat on the kitchen table, a thick, white rectangle of temptation. $750,000. I could see the life that money could buy. A nice apartment in a city where no one knew my name. A college education without a mountain of debt. The ability to walk into a store and buy new clothes instead of second-hand ones. To eat at a restaurant without staring at the prices. A life without the constant, gnawing anxiety of poverty. It was everything I had ever thought I wanted. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, pacing the creaking floors of the house. Every room I entered seemed to argue with me. The sunny yellow kitchen my mother had painted whispered of her hope. The sturdy, handcrafted furniture Arthur had kept safe spoke of his steadfast promise. This wasn't just a property to be liquidated. It was a vessel for a story, my story. To sell it would be to tear out the pages before I had even finished reading them. But the fear was a powerful counter-argument. What was I even doing here? I was a kid with no skills, no plan, and a few $100s to my name. How could I possibly maintain a house and 5 acres of land? The roof on the barn was sagging. The porch pillar needed to be replaced. God only knew what other problems were lurking beneath the surface. The money was safety. The house was a risk, a beautiful, sentimental, and possibly foolish risk. That night, sleep was impossible. The choice churned in my gut. I felt like I was being torn in two. Finally, unable to bear the confines of the house, I went outside. The moon was full, bathing the entire property in a silvery, ethereal light. I found myself walking toward the barn, its dark, hulking shape looming in the night. I hadn't been inside it yet. It felt like the final frontier of this place. The large barn doors were held shut by a simple wooden latch. It slid open with a groan. I pushed the heavy door, and it swung inward on protesting hinges. The air inside was thick with the smell of old hay, dust, and time. Moonlight streamed in through a high window in the loft, illuminating a vast, cavernous space. Old, rusted farm equipment sat in the corners like sleeping iron beasts. A ladder led up to the hayloft, which was shrouded in shadows. I remembered my mother's letter. Arthur knows where it is. He will guide you. I hadn't found another clue from him yet. I had looked all over the house, but there was nothing. Maybe I had been looking in the wrong place. Maybe the next clue wasn't in the house at all. My gaze was drawn back to the hayloft. It was the one place I hadn't searched. With a sense of trepidation, I walked over to the ladder and began to climb. The wooden rungs were solid under my hands. When I pulled myself up into the loft, the air was even thicker, the scent of dry hay almost overwhelming. Moonlight cut a sharp rectangle across the floorboards, illuminating a sea of dust. And in the very center of that patch of light, almost as if it had been placed on a stage, was a small wooden toolbox. It wasn't an accident. It couldn't be. It was too perfectly placed. I approached it slowly. It was old, the wood dark and worn smooth with use. The metal latch was rusted. I knelt and flicked it open. Inside, there were no tools, There was only another letter, this one wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the damp, and beneath it, a small, heavy object wrapped in a faded blue handkerchief. I picked up the letter first. It was from Arthur. "Leo," it said, "if you found this, you've likely met Mr. Trask or someone like him. They have been circling this land like vultures for years. They see profit, they do not see the history. They do not see the love that is soaked into this soil. They will offer you a fortune. It will be tempting. I know what it is to have nothing and to be offered everything. The choice, of course, must be yours. But before you make it, there is more you need to know. The truth is not always simple, and your mother's story is more complex than you can imagine. What I am about to tell you, I have told no one. Your mother did not run from a bad relationship. She ran for her life. The man you know as your father was not just abusive. He was dangerous in a way that is hard to comprehend. He was involved with a criminal organization, a network of men who operated outside the law, and he was not a small player. Sarah found out things she was never meant to know. She tried to leave him, but he wouldn't let her go. He saw you not as a son, but as leverage, as a possession. Her escape was a miracle. When she came here, she was terrified, but she was also determined to build a new life for you both. But they found her. His people came looking. It was no longer safe for her here. The plan was for her to disappear, to get a new identity and move far away. I was helping her arrange it. We were days away from succeeding. The letter stopped there. The page ended. I frantically unwrapped the oilcloth, looking for more, but there was only the one page. My blood ran cold. Days away from succeeding? What happened? My hands trembled as I reached for the object wrapped in the handkerchief. I unfolded the cloth. Inside was a small, tarnished silver locket. I pried it open. On one side was a tiny, impossibly clear photograph of my mother. She was beautiful, her smile radiant, her eyes full of light. On the other side was a picture of a baby, wrapped in a blue blanket, his face scrunched up as he slept. It was me. Seeing her face, so full of life and love, and seeing myself as a baby, safe in her world, broke something open inside me. This was real. This love was real. This danger was real. The developer's offer, the $750,000, suddenly felt like a pittance. It felt like blood money. How could I sell this land, the only place she had ever felt safe, the place she had fought so hard to preserve for me? I sat there in the dusty hayloft, the moonlight shining on the locket in my hand, and I knew the decision was no longer a choice between money and sentiment. It was a choice between honoring a legacy of love and sacrifice, or erasing it for my own comfort. And suddenly, the path forward, while terrifying, was crystal clear. But Arthur's letter had ended on a cliffhanger. There was more to the story. I had to find the rest of it. The toolbox was empty now, but as I ran my hand along the inside, my fingers brushed against something carved into the bottom. It wasn't a word, but a symbol. A simple carving of a key, an old skeleton key. It was another clue. My treasure hunt wasn't over yet. It had just gone deeper. Now, I want to pause the story for a second and talk to you. Right there, in that moment, I was at a crossroads. They offered me everything I thought I ever wanted, a clean break, a new start, free from the past. And I think a lot of us face choices like that in our lives. Maybe not for a house, maybe not for that kind of money, but we're offered the easy way out. The path of least resistance. The one that lets you walk away from the hard stuff, the complicated history, the painful memories. And then there's the other path, the harder one. The one that requires you to stay, to fight, to face the very things you want to run from, because something in your gut, something deep down, tells you it's the right thing to do. It's the path that leads to who you're meant to be. Have you ever been there? Have you ever had to make that kind of choice? If this is hitting home for you, let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and I think we can learn a lot from each other's stories. This community is built on people who understand that the hardest paths often lead to the most beautiful destinations. Okay, let's get back to that night in the barn. I sat there for what felt like hours, the silver locket cold in my palm, my mind racing, the carving in the bottom of the toolbox, a key. It wasn't a clue that led to a place, but to an object, an old skeleton key. Where would a man like Arthur, a man who seemed to value history and substance, keep important keys? I thought about the house, the living room, the kitchen, the upstairs I had barely explored, but my gut told me it wouldn't be in the main living space. It would be somewhere practical, somewhere foundational. My mind went to the fireplace in the living room. It was the heart of the house, a massive structure of fieldstone that ran up through the center of the building, solid, permanent. I climbed down from the loft, my flashlight beam now very weak and flickering. I needed to get back to the house. I hurried across the moonlit yard, the locket clutched tight in my hand. Back inside, the house felt different. It was no longer just a shelter, it was a fortress, a place that had protected my mother and was now protecting her memory. I went straight to the fireplace. The mantelpiece was a thick, rough-hewn beam of oak. I ran my hands over it, feeling the grain of the wood, the nicks and scratches of a long life. Nothing. I knelt and examined the stonework around the hearth. The stones were irregular, fitted together with thick mortar. I pushed and pulled at them, but they were solid. Frustrated, I sat back on my heels. My weak light flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I let out a curse, my voice swallowed by the silence. I was left with only the moonlight filtering through the windows, and that's when I saw it. The moonlight didn't just illuminate, it cast shadows, and the shadows playing across the uneven surface of the stones revealed something my flashlight had obscured. One of the stones just to the right of the firebox had a slightly deeper shadow around its edge. It didn't sit quite as flush as the others. My heart leapt. I crawled over and pressed on it with my fingertips. It didn't move. I pushed harder, using the heel of my hand. There was a faint scraping sound, a grinding of stone on stone, and the rock shifted inward an inch. It was a loose stone, a hiding place. I hooked my fingers around the edge and pulled. It was heavy, but it came free, revealing a dark rectangular cavity in the wall. I reached inside, my hand brushing against something cold and metallic. I pulled it out. It was a large, heavy, wrought iron skeleton key, rusted with age, and tied to its handle with a piece of twine was another final envelope. This one was thicker than the others, and the paper felt brittle. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was the end of the story. This was the truth Arthur had been protecting all these years. I didn't read it there in the dark. I took the key and the letter and went back to the kitchen. I sat at the small table my mother had once used, the developer's contract still sitting there like a pale ghost in the moonlight. I waited for the sun to rise. I needed the clarity of daylight for this. When dawn broke, filling the kitchen with clean morning light, I finally opened the envelope. The letter was long, Arthur's handwriting more cramped and urgent than before, as if he was racing against time to get the words down. "Leo," it began, "I hope you have found the locket. I hope you have seen your mother's face. Now you must know the rest. You must know the full weight of the sacrifice she made for you. As I told you, we were days away from getting her and you out of the country, away from the reach of your father, Richard. He was a powerful man, connected and cruel. But someone must have tipped him off. He found out where she was. He came to North Fork. He didn't come alone. He brought 2 other men with him. I saw their car go down this road. I knew. I grabbed my hunting rifle and came over here, but I was too late. They were already leaving. Richard was driving, and he looked triumphant. He didn't see me in the trees. The house was quiet, too quiet. I ran inside, fearing the worst. Sarah was here. She was alive, but she was alone. You were gone. Richard had taken you. She was broken, Leo, utterly shattered. He had left her a message. She could live, but he would raise you. You would be his. He knew it would be a fate worse than death for her, to know her son was being raised by a monster. It was the ultimate cruelty. My breath hitched in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, picturing the scene, the horror of it. We had one chance, Arthur's letter continued. Richard had a weakness, his own reputation. In his world, he presented himself as a legitimate businessman. Having a child suddenly appear, a child his associates knew he didn't have, would raise questions he didn't want to answer. He had taken you to a temporary place, a holding spot, before he could integrate you into his life. We had a window, a very small one. Sarah made a choice. It was the bravest and most terrible choice I have ever witnessed. She called him. She told him he could keep you. She told him she would disappear forever, that she would never interfere, never try to see you again. In exchange, he had to do one thing. He had to put you into the state system, anonymously. He had to drop you at a hospital or a fire station, severing his connection to you completely. It was the only way to launder you, to wash his hands of the problem, while also ensuring you were cut off from her forever. For him, it was a clean solution. For her, it was a living hell, but it was the only way to get you out of his hands. He agreed. A few days later, I found out through a contact that a baby boy had been left at a hospital 2 counties over. It was you. You were safe from him. But to keep you that way, Sarah had to uphold her end of the bargain. She had to disappear, and she had to make sure you could never be traced back to her, or he would come for you again. And that is the final terrible piece of the truth, Leo. Your mother did not die in an accident. There was no accident. A few weeks after you were safely in the system, her car went off a bridge on a rainy night. The police ruled it an accident, but I know it wasn't. Richard was tying up loose ends. He had what he wanted, her out of the picture. And he was making sure she could never change her mind. He murdered her. The letter fell from my hands. The room spun. A low, guttural sound of pure anguish escaped my lips. Murdered. My mother was murdered. The story I'd been fed my whole life wasn't just a lie. It was a cover-up for an unimaginable horror. The system hadn't failed me. It had, in its own blind, bureaucratic way, been the instrument of my salvation. My mother hadn't abandoned me. She had traded her life for mine. I stumbled out of the house, gasping for air. I fell to my knees in the overgrown yard, the damp earth cold beneath my hands, and I vomited. The physical sickness was nothing compared to the sickness in my soul. The grief was a tidal wave pulling me under. I wept for her, for the terror she must have felt, for the impossible choice she had to make. And through the grief, a new emotion began to burn. Rage. A white-hot, purifying rage directed at the man who had done this, the man whose blood ran in my veins. The skeleton key was still on the kitchen table. I knew what it was for. It was for the final secret, the final piece of the inheritance my mother and Arthur had left me. I wiped my face, my tears, and my rage, hardening into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. I went back inside. The developer's offer was a joke, a sick, cosmic joke. This land wasn't for sale. It was sacred ground. It was the only monument my mother had, and I would defend it with my last breath. I picked up the key. It was time to see what it opened. The skeleton key felt heavy, ancient. I knew instinctively it wasn't for any door in the house. This key was for something hidden, something locked away for a long time. I thought about the property, the places I hadn't fully explored, the barn, the loft. The toolbox had been a signpost, not the destination. I went back to the barn, the morning light now bright and clear, chasing away the shadows. Inside, the barn was less intimidating in the daylight. I stood in the center, turning in a slow circle, scanning every inch of the vast space. What would a man like Arthur lock away? Not money, not valuables in the traditional sense. He would lock away proof. He would lock away the truth. My eyes fell on a section of the floor against the back wall. Unlike the other floorboards, which were wide, rough planks, these were narrower and seemed to form a distinct rectangle, about the size of a door, a trapdoor. It was so well integrated I hadn't noticed it before. There was no handle, but there was a small, keyhole-shaped opening cut into one of the planks, its edges dark with age. I knelt, the iron key cold in my hand. I slid it into the keyhole. It was a perfect fit. I turned it, and with a heavy, satisfying clunk, an internal lock disengaged. I used the key as a handle to pry the edge of the door up. It was heavy, but it lifted, revealing a dark, narrow space and a set of steep wooden steps leading down into the earth. A root cellar. The air that rose from the opening was cool and smelled of damp soil and secrets. I took a breath and descended the steps, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. The cellar was small, no more than 10 feet by 10 feet, with stone walls and a hard-packed dirt floor. In the center of the room sat a single object, a large metal footlocker, the kind soldiers use. It was secured with a heavy padlock. The skeleton key wasn't for the trapdoor lock, it was for this. I inserted the key into the padlock. It turned smoothly. The lock sprang open. I lifted the heavy lid of the footlocker. Inside, meticulously organized, was the evidence of my mother's life and her fight. There were stacks of letters she had written but never sent, addressed to me at different ages, my 5th birthday, my 10th, my 16th. There were legal documents, copies of restraining orders she had filed against Richard before she ran. There were newspaper clippings about his business dealings with certain names and connections circled in red ink. She had been building a case against him, and at the very bottom, in a sealed, waterproof bag, was a small black cassette tape. A label on it, in my mother's handwriting, read, "For Leo, the truth." My hands were shaking as I took it out. What was on this tape? A final message. More evidence. The house had an old stereo system in the living room, one of those 1980s models with a cassette deck. I took the tape and went back to the house, my mind numb. I put the tape in the deck and pressed play. There was a hiss of static and then a man's voice. It was smooth, confident, and dripping with a chilling arrogance. "You think you can run from me, Sarah. You think you can hide my son from me. You belong to me. He belongs to me. There is nowhere on this earth you can go where I won't find you." It was him, my father, Richard. The voice was a recording of a phone call, tinny and distant, but the menace was immediate and terrifying. Then my mother's voice. It was trembling, but it was strong. "He is not your son. He is mine, and I will never let you turn him into you." The recording continued, a horrifying documentation of his threats, his possessiveness, his utter lack of humanity, and my mother, fighting back with every ounce of her will. She had recorded him. She had been gathering proof, not just for the law, but for me. She wanted me to hear it from his own mouth. She wanted me to know who he was, and why she had to do what she did. The tape ended with his final, chilling words. "You will regret this, Sarah. I promise you that." The tape clicked off, and the silence that followed was deafening. I finally understood. The inheritance wasn't the house. It wasn't the land. It wasn't even the money I still hadn't found. The inheritance was this: the truth. The terrible, painful, liberating truth. Arthur and my mother hadn't just left me a sanctuary. They had left me an arsenal. This footlocker contained everything I would need to destroy the man who had taken everything from them. And then I remembered her letter. I saved what I could. A start. The money. Where was it? I went back to the footlocker in the cellar. I lifted out the files and the letters, and underneath it all, lining the bottom of the chest, were neat, plastic-wrapped bundles of cash. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was substantial. I counted it. $20,000, saved over years, a little at a time, by a terrified young mother who was planning for a future she would never get to see. I sat on the cold dirt floor of the cellar, surrounded by the fragments of my mother's war. The choice was no longer about staying or selling. A new choice had presented itself, far more dangerous and far more significant. I could take this money and the truth and disappear. I could build a quiet life, always looking over my shoulder but safe. Or I could use what they had given me. I could use the evidence, the letters, the tape. I could fight back. I could seek justice for my mother. It was a choice between safety and justice, between living a quiet life or honoring her legacy with a righteous war. And in that dark, earthy cellar, holding the proof of her courage, I knew there was no choice at all. I was my mother's son, and the fight she had started, I was going to finish. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Mark Trask at Pioneer Holdings. He answered on the second ring, his voice slick with manufactured friendliness. "Leo, I was hoping I'd hear from you. Have you had a chance to look over our generous offer?" I stood on the porch, the same porch where he had stood just days before, and looked out over the land. My mother's land. The morning mist was burning off the fields, and the world felt clean and new. "I have," I said, my voice steady and clear. And the answer is no. There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end. "No, I think you might be misunderstanding. This is a life-changing amount of money, son." "I understand it perfectly," I said, the words tasting like freedom. "This property is not for sale. Not now, not ever. Please don't contact me again." Before he could respond, I hung up. I could imagine his frustration, his disbelief. To him, I was just a foolish kid turning down a fortune. He couldn't possibly understand that what I was holding on to was priceless. My second call was to Evelyn Reed, the lawyer. I told her everything. I told her about the letters, the locket, the trapdoor, the footlocker. I told her about the cassette tape and the money. I read her excerpts from my mother's letters and Arthur's final testament. I spoke for a long time, my voice raw with emotion, but my purpose unwavering. When I finished, there was a long pause on her end. I could hear her breathing, the faint sound of her shuffling papers in her office, hundreds of miles away. I had no idea how she would react. She was a lawyer, a professional. This was a messy, emotional, and dangerous story. "Leo," she finally said, and her voice was different. The professional reserve was gone, replaced by a deep human empathy. "Arthur told me he had made a promise. He never told me the details. He just said it was the most important work of his life. Now I understand." She took a deep breath. "What you have, the tape, the documents, this is more than just a family history. This could be a criminal case, a very serious one. This man, your father, Richard, is he still alive?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't even know his full name." "It might be in the documents," she said, her mind already working, the lawyer's pragmatism kicking in. "Leo, you have a choice here. You can take this evidence to the police. It's old, and it will be a difficult case to make, especially if he's as powerful as Arthur believed. Or you can let it be. You can honor your mother's memory by living the life she wanted for you, a safe, peaceful life here on this land." It was the same question I had asked myself in the cellar, now posed by a voice of reason, safety or justice. She didn't run so I could be safe, I said, the conviction solidifying in my heart. She ran so I could be free, and I won't be free as long as he's out there. I won't be free until her story is told. I want to fight. All right, Evelyn said, her voice firm, resolute. Then I'll fight with you. Arthur was my client, but more than that, he was my friend. I'll help you, free of charge. This is pro bono. Consider it my part in honoring Arthur's promise. She told me to carefully document everything, to make copies, and to bring the originals to her. She would start digging, using her resources to find out what had become of Richard. The days that followed were a whirlwind of purpose. I used some of my mother's money to buy a used scanner and a laptop. I spent hours in the quiet house scanning every single document, every letter, every newspaper clipping. I digitized the audio from the cassette tape. I created a fortress of digital evidence, backing it up on multiple drives, ensuring that this story could never be buried again. As I worked, I lived. I started to truly inhabit the house. I patched the leaky faucet in the kitchen. I bought a lawnmower from the general store and spent a whole day cutting back the overgrown jungle in the yard, revealing the stone-lined flower beds my mother had planted. I found a job bussing tables at the diner in town a few nights a week. It was humble work, but it was mine. The $20,000 from my mother was my war chest, not for living expenses. I was determined to build my life with my own two hands, just as she would have wanted. The people in town started to become more than just faces. Martha from the store would save me day-old bread. My boss at the diner, a gruff but fair man named Sal, taught me how to make a decent pot of coffee. They didn't ask many questions, but they offered a quiet, steady support that felt more real than anything I'd ever known. I was no longer just the strange kid at the old Vance place. I was Leo. A month after I made my decision, I drove a rented car to Evelyn Reed's office. I walked in with a briefcase containing the Foot Locker's contents. She greeted me with a warm, genuine smile. We spent the entire day going over the evidence. She had already done some preliminary research. Richard's full name was Richard Sterling. He was now the CEO of a major international logistics company. He was incredibly wealthy, powerful, and lived in a mansion in a gated community. He had remarried, had other children. He had successfully buried his past. "This won't be easy," Evelyn warned me, her expression serious. "He will have an army of lawyers. They will try to discredit you, to discredit your mother. They will paint you as an opportunist, a troubled kid looking for a payday." "Let them try," I said. "I'm not looking for his money. I'm looking for a murder conviction." The legal battle was long and grueling, just as Evelyn had predicted. It took over a year. His lawyers tried every trick in the book. They filed motions to have the evidence thrown out. They smeared my mother's name in the press, painting her as an unstable runaway. They tried to portray me as a delinquent, bringing up my file from the foster care system. But we had the truth. We had the tape. We had Arthur's letters. And we had my mother's voice, preserved in her own words, telling her story. The tide began to turn when a journalist from a national paper took an interest in the case, publishing a long-form piece about the forgotten boy and his mother's hidden war. Public opinion shifted. The story of a powerful man preying on a vulnerable woman and her child resonated. The climax came not in a dramatic courtroom confession, but in a quiet, out-of-court settlement. Faced with the undeniable evidence of the tape and the risk of a high-profile murder trial that could destroy his empire, Richard Sterling folded. He didn't admit guilt, not publicly, but as part of a sealed agreement, a significant portion of his fortune was transferred to a charitable foundation established in my mother's name, Sarah's Haven, dedicated to helping women and children escaping domestic violence. And most importantly, the district attorney, armed with our evidence, reopened the case of my mother's death. While the conviction was still a long shot after so many years, his reputation was shattered. The shadow he had cast for so long was finally exposed to the light. I didn't get the satisfaction of seeing him in prison, but I got something more important. I got her name back. I got her story told. I returned to North Fork, to the house on the old logging road. It was autumn again, 2 years after I had first arrived. The leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold. The porch pillar was fixed. The barn had a new solid roof. The flower beds were full of late-blooming mums. It wasn't a perfect house. It still creaked and groaned in the wind. The floors still sloped a little. But it was mine. It was my home. I had found more than just a house. I had found a community. I had found a purpose. And I had found myself. The hole in my heart, the one left by the story of the mother who didn't want me, had been filled. It was filled with the truth of her love, her courage, and her sacrifice. The scars of my past were still there. They would always be a part of me. But they were no longer gaping wounds. They were reminders of a battle fought and won. This house, this land, it's more than my inheritance. It's a living testament to the idea that you can build a future on the foundations of a painful past. It's a reminder that home isn't just a place you live, it's a story you belong to. My mother and Arthur gave me that. They gave me a place to stand. And that's really the lesson here, isn't it? We all have a story. Some parts are painful, some are confusing, and some are buried so deep we're afraid to go looking for them. But our stories are our most valuable inheritance. They are the source of our strength. Finding this house, uncovering this truth, it taught me that you can't run from your past. But you can reclaim it. You can reframe it. You can take the broken pieces and build something new, something strong, something that is truly your own. So I want to ask you, what does home mean to you? Is it a place, a person, a feeling? Is it something you have or something you're still searching for? Share your story in the comments below. I promise you, your story matters. And if this story, my story, resonated with you, please subscribe and join our community. We're all just trying to find our way home, and maybe we can help each other navigate the journey. Thank you for listening. You are not alone.